Good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. In a moment, we'll discuss the papers with TV presenter Mary Ann O'Hotter and Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, Ryan Sabey. But first, should we take a look through the papers very quickly? We'll start with the Sunday Telegraph, which reports on the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, saying the UK is ready to hit Yemen's Houthis once again. The Observer, well, that's focusing on the economic risk of any widening Middle East conflict. 100 days of hell. The Mirror marks a grim milestone in the war in Gaza, reporting on a premature baby there clinging to life. The Sunday Express writes about calls from an MP for post office chiefs to be sacked if found responsible for the Horizon scandal. And according to the Sunday Times, Theresa May's government knew about the IT concerns, but still pushed through a CBE for former post office boss Paula Venables. The Mail on Sunday splashes an exclusive with details about a man involved in a revolt on a British Airways flight in November. And the Sun on Sunday has a story about Lauren Goodman's former relationship with footballer Carl Walker. And the cold weather is the top story for the Star. The headline, brace yourself for the big freeze. Not looking forward to that. So what should we do? We'll start then, Ryan, with you. And the Daily Mail, Rishi Sunak, has been sort of saying that action in Yemen was self-defence.
That's right. The Prime Minister has done an interview with the political editor Glenn Owen on his trip to Ukraine this week, and one of the key messages that he tried to get across during that interview is that the world is its most volatile that it has been for years, and in every corner of the world there is something that needs to be addressed, often by Western powers. And one thing that came evident during that trip is that the UK's money towards Ukraine, the 2.5 billion that we have given for the next year. And I think the one thing that people inside government are trying to do is trying to use that money and what that has done to galvanise the rest of the world. Because we've got the US haven't given money, they haven't set aside any money yet for the following year. That's being held up in Congress. And we've also got the situation in the EU where that money is also being held back. So you can that money is meant to be in the region of about 90 billion pounds. So we're just giving a small fraction. So you can just see the scale of what is needed to actually make sure that Ukraine can go on and fight that war. But Rishi Sunak brings up the issue of if you don't address these issues in the Red Sea, it really will affect the global economy. And if you don't give all this money to Ukraine and help out in other areas of the world, it emboldens people like Vladimir Putin and also North Korea and Iran.
Yeah, you do wonder where this is going, because there is that stance from the Ministry of Defence that say we're going to keep going, we'll stop, we'll fire, we'll see the response of the Houthis. And you do wonder where this is going, Mary Ann, because there are two wars already ravishing across the world.
Well, and all the others that don't get the same level of media and press scrutiny. With the situation with the Houthis and the protection or the kind of military action around the shipping in the North Sea, the Red Sea, the question is kind of where then do those avenues of demonstrating unrest, where do they happen? Are they terrorist acts on sovereign soil in the UK and in the US? There'll be an increased security risk. Is that linked to Iran and all the other places that unrest could be triggered, I guess? How does Iraq fit into all this? All those countries where, and even in Yemen itself, in fact, because of course the kind of the internationally recognised national government that rules in the north of the country, and then you've got the Houthi rebels who govern most of the south of the country, including the capital, and Yemen has been in such a difficult place for so long, and there's this incredibly fragile peace. The world's biggest humanitarian crisis is what the UN called it last year in Yemen. People have starved to death. Children are starving to death. There's a famine, and it's entirely human-made. This isn't natural causes. And that not only not only are we talking about global security, we're also talking about the future of the Yemeni people as well.
Well, as things stand, the Houthi rebels say they will retaliate, and that might be in the UK, and that's what
There might be more attacks in Israel as well.
Yeah, this is true, and that's what the Sunday Mirror are focusing, aren't they? That British chiefs are kind of monitoring the situation, but they say that they're braced for any Houthi revenge plots.
Yeah, that's right. Now, being braced is different to preventing, and also being braced means that you've not started something. I mean, they say we didn't start it, we're defending ourselves from something that is untenable. The fact that this is an action with UN backing, I think, is significant. The fact that other major powers in the region, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, are all cautioning the greatest of restraint, because it's a tinderbox and people are throwing fireworks around.
Well, let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph, Ryan, because the Rwanda bill, it's still very much in the spotlight, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The Rwanda bill, this is what you'd call Rishi Sunak's flagship legislation, really. The one thing that he wants to do, and one thing he set out to try and do last year was to stop the boats. And this, he thinks, is a big part of that. But one of the problems is there's almost £500 million being earmarked for this scheme, and the UK has not sent one asylum seeker to Rwanda. So at the moment, it literally hasn't got off the ground. But it is another big week. We've got these groups of Conservative MPs, they call themselves the Five Families, whether it's the New Conservatives or which are part of that, and they're all asking for more from this legislation. Rishi Sunak has asked for some bright ideas, but he doesn't want to veer too much away from what he has. The trouble is, you have Rwanda, who won't agree to take anyone if they push it too far. So it's almost like playing three-dimensional chess almost. He's got his own ministers who are perhaps not too happy with it. He has his backbench MPs he's got to try and keep on side. On the other hand, he's got Rwanda. Then you have to keep within those parameters, otherwise the whole deal will fall apart.
I think fundamentally it was like legally incoherent and morally bankrupt from the beginning. So just knock it on the head and
it's
actually
one of those
take
issues
responsibility.
that split the Conservative Party not just in half, but shattered it, really, hasn't
And the real risk is then that the loudest voice coming from the Conservative Party becomes an increasingly right, extreme voice, and that becomes the mainstream, and it pulls the kind of the gravity of the party further right, which does none of us any service, regardless of which way you're going to vote in the next general election. The more stable and solid and sensible our opposition is, the better for all.
It doesn't sound like anything in politics at the moment, does it? Shall we move on to the Sunday Times? We've all been following the Horizon story, so many lives shattered. But we're hearing now that the CBE given to Miss Venables, she's given that back. But
yes,
it's the wider ramifications. Who knew what and when?
Well, that's it. So when you're nominated for an honour, it goes to a kind of selection panel who assess whether you really are worth it, what risks there might be, all the skeletons in your closet, and then that goes on to a kind of further series of recommendations and checks. And what's coming out now is that when she was first nominated by the business department, when Paula Venables, the head of the post office, was nominated by the business department, there were questions asked, because this was just before the case of the submasters, the sub-post masters was going to the High Court. So it was already in the public domain that there were very many questions asked about the truth of what the post office had been saying in courts of law, and in the way that they had or hadn't been allowing access to the evidence that they knew about the Horizon, this faulty IT system, and people kind of shrugged it off or didn't follow up and went, it's probably fine. It's too much effort. There's going to be too much friction.
Well, it was that ITV drama that it seems has really cut through, Ryan, and it was 4 nights of drama that seemed to have to pick up everyone's imagination on the story.
I think you need those human stories, those emotional stories, and you can see it through someone else's life. We've all been into our local post office, and we know how hard these people work, and for them to get caught up in it. But in terms of the CBE, you look at on a basic leadership level, should she have got that? In a normal year, there's normally about 5 prosecutions against postmasters. It went up to 60 per year. It should take someone in that organisation to say something doesn't look quite right. If those cases spike, someone in that organisation should step in and say, we've got a problem.
Well, I think originally the thinking was, oh, hang on a minute, people have had hands in tills for all this time, but only now do we know. But then it became clear that actually this was a more systemic issue, and that's where the cover-up questions begin. And one of the suggestions is the reason that Paula Venables was given this honour is because, for exactly that reason, that she held the line, that she said that they weren't going to pay out, they weren't going to talk about discrepancies in the system, because it opens the post office to accusations of,
potentially
incompetence.
too.
But yeah, exactly. And the post office was in, and continues to be, in this kind of quite fragile commercial position. And so maybe she was being rewarded for doing the difficult thing and holding the line. But actually, obviously, it was the wrong thing to do, legally and morally.
Yeah, okay. Do either of you use sat-navs in the car then?
Almost every time I go out, actually.
Well, it depends whether you mean like one of those standalone boxes.
Yeah, that's built in with the car.
Or whether you mean my phone.
I use the phone much more. But
because you get the real-time traffic updates.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But changes are on the way, significant changes. It's been updated, and we should be told not to go down the wrong road.
That's right, and almost you can tell that there's an election coming up because there's help for drivers out there. They'll be telling us next that they're going to freeze fuel duty for another year. But it does seem that sometimes when you do go out and you're driving around and you just hit some traffic, there might be miles and miles of traffic ahead of you. This should have been updated, and you should be able to know that you can navigate around it. The only trouble is if you're all navigating around all those villages, there'll be chaos in smaller places, but I think there should be a situation where you can sort of dodge the jams, and if that alert system is put in place, it will at least forewarn drivers when they're heading out. Yeah,
good news for drivers, I think, with this.
One of the figures that really struck me in the newspaper's coverage of the story is that it's estimated that at any point 15% of drivers in urban areas are driving around either because they're lost or because they're looking for a parking space.
Oh, it's the parking space that gets me, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Well, get on the bus.
On the bike. Lastly, briefly, Mary Ann, can you talk to me about girls outperforming boys all through education? It's something that we've known for such a long time.
We have. This is a very comprehensive study run by a team led by the Cambridge University assessment scheme, and it's using this huge data set of open access data, and basically at every attainment point from primary age up through university and beyond, girls outperform boys.
We know this. Why isn't anything being done?
Well, so one of the lead researchers is saying that we've known this for a long time. The first point of assessment is teacher-based assessment in primary school, and he suggests that it could indicate that it's actually perception and the way that assessments are created. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then pupils are streamed. They're treated slightly differently. We have all those social expectations that people internalise. That when children look at what's really available to them in terms of what their options are, it's already curtailed, and so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So actually, maybe the grown-ups have to do all the work, not just educational reform from the Department of Education or what have you.
Yeah, you make a good point. I've got a daughter and a son, and you can really see the differences in how they pick up, what they're learning in the classroom. So let's hope change is on the way. Thank you both, Mary Ann, Ryan. Really appreciate your company this morning.